Unfortunately, to our great regret, Professor Tara from Chennai was unable to join us. She was unable to get a visa in time, which says something cultural and social and political about our current environment. The fact that we have a government right now, and it's of course a global phenomenon in terms of living in a state of siege and anxiety about global movements, but we have a particularly reactionary government right now that unfortunately has made it very difficult for many of our colleagues to join us from different parts of the world. We've suffered the same problem last year at our Global Mental Health Conference, in fact, with several colleagues from Africa who were supposed to join us. So this is a dilemma we're facing, I think, that we all need to address in some way so that we can have better exchange and dialogue with our colleagues around the world. Fortunately, Professor Malla has worked very closely with Dr. Tara over the last several years, as have others here, Professor Bibot and others. And so he will be able to share some of her work with us. And so it's my pleasure and privilege then to introduce once again Professor Malla, who I think at this stage in the conference doesn't need a more detailed invitation. Thank you.
As you can see, I'm not Dr. Tara. I did think about wearing a sari, but I didn't think that would work either. And as Lawrence said, I really feel that I should hang my head in shame as a Canadian that someone like Dr. Tara, where it was explained to the immigration people weeks ago, and they even failed to respond to any inquiries on her part, didn't answer her phone. We tried to send emails, we faxed the material, no response at all. And Dr. Tara is a big player at WHO. She travels a lot. In fact, she has less trouble getting a visa to the United States, but she was unable to get a visa to Canada. So we thought about Skype, but with the time difference and potential frustrations associated with technology, we decided not to. So she sent me her presentation, and fortunately I am very familiar with the work that she was going to present. I have been collaborating with Tara for the last 11, 12 years. I'm in Chennai almost every year, and Tara has had many collaborations in the United States, and especially with the Douglas and McGill and University of Montreal. So she was going to talk about, within the context of our conference, is early intervention a priority in low and middle income countries? And as I mentioned yesterday, we have Tara and her group, SCARF, and our group here at PEP. We have a joint collaboration of looking at exactly what Lawrence was talking about earlier, investigating the differences in outcome in first episode psychosis. And we've been engaged in this work for several years, and now we have a new grant to look at it much more molecularly. And Vidya later on will do the other presentation instead of Dr. Ramesh Kumar. And again, it's the joint work, so it should be relatively easy for Vidya to do that. Everything is easy for her to do. So Dr. Tara wanted to obviously go through a few things, and I'll do my best to try to interpret this for you. And as I said, it's not entirely new for me either. So this is basically, I think you all know that a large part of the world's population lives in India and China. India's population now is about 1.2 billion, so it's almost close to the population of China. And what is particularly relevant for her work, Dr. Tara's program is called the Schizophrenia Research Foundation. It is a non-governmental organization funded entirely through non-governmental sources and through these brilliant collaborations she has been able to make over the years, and not only provided what I think is a top-class service, but as you will see later on, extremely innovative, from which we can learn a lot. And it's situated in Chennai, which used to be called Madras, and it has a population of 5.2 million, but the state of Tamil Nadu, of which Chennai is the capital, has a population of 72 million and is about the size of Greece, which has a population of 8 million and has stayed static for many, many, many years. But not the population of Tamil Nadu, has grown steadily. In terms of psychiatric morbidity, as you can see, almost 10 million people, 8 to 9 million people are estimated to have severe mental disorders, and there are only about 4,000 psychiatrists. And I suppose I could include myself as one of those who deserted. And as Tara suggests, that part of that is due to migration, that many psychiatrists or many physicians left and trained in psychiatry elsewhere and stayed. There are 40 mental hospitals. Actually, only a handful of them are decent facilities where you would want to be treated. There's a particular shortage of nurses, and that actually has, I think, more to do with the status that nurses have in India. It's not very high. And this is a particularly worrisome thing, because you really, especially in hospital settings, you do need well-trained mental health nurses. India has about 500 million people under the age of 25. And as you can see, 35% of the population is under 18. So if you're looking at the risk for psychosis, the population at risk is huge for psychosis, much, much larger proportionately than it would be in a country like Canada, where we have a relatively smaller proportion of population. Iran is another country where actually 60% of the population is under the age of 25. And the incidence of psychosis between the age of 14 and 30 is relatively high. You'll see later on, I think Kelly is going to present some data from Montreal. Tara has provided a couple of case vignettes. I think it's a very good way of describing some of the situations that they have to deal with day to day. This is the story of a 45-year-old woman married who is living with her husband and in-laws, which would not be unusual, it would be probably the norm. She has a master's degree. She works in a private company in the human resources department. No significant medical problems. She's perimenopausal, never had any contact with mental health professions, has had 2 dissociative spells, which something like being possessed in the past, that have been treated non-medically by what Tara describes as magical religious methods. And now she presents with symptoms of auditory hallucinations of 4 to 5 years duration, but persistent for the previous 3 months, and then was hospitalized in a state of catatonia, which we don't see a lot here anymore, with mutism, staring, disorganized behavior, constantly keeping her eyes open till they water but not closing them, refusing to sleep, and had not eaten anything for a day. Another case, this one rural, the other one was urban, a 28-year-old man living alone with 8 years of education, dropped out of school, a lower socioeconomic status, living in a rural area, and most of the history in this case was obtained from neighbors. No known medical history, no prior contact with mental health services, and family have no contact with him either. Temperamentally aloof, and the contact was initiated by neighbors because they heard about the telepsychiatry that SCARF runs, which I'll show you in a minute because Tara has provided a few slides about their telepsychiatry program, which actually I am quite familiar with. This man was, at the time, living in a small, dilapidated home, quite cut off from even the nearest village, and only occasionally a neighbor had contact with him, and he would chase people away with a knife. Obviously, I would imagine he was very paranoid, had occasional bouts of aggression towards family members, and that's how he obviously lost contact with his family, and was constantly muttering and gesturing to himself and demonstrated suspiciousness, poor self-care. And he'd been ill for 12 years, so he would have probably had an onset around the age of 16. So these two case vignettes kind of give you some flavor of the kind of patients that they see at SCARF. It also gives us an understanding that if the outcome at SCARF or in India in general is better, it's not because they're seeing less mild cases. If anything, they're actually seeing very, very severe cases. The initiative for early intervention at SCARF, it started as a kind of a joint initiative between them and us roughly about eight years ago. By the way, SCARF runs a schizophrenia conference every 2 years. It's called ICONS, International Congress of Schizophrenia, in the fall. And I can tell you without bias, even before I had any collaboration with them, it is probably the most impressive, the best academically, and in terms of its breadth and depth, the best schizophrenia meeting I ever have been to, and I go there every 2 years. I know Alan Corin and Gilles Bibot, they're always there as well. And it is limited in the sense that they only take about 300-400 people, but it is truly a meeting worth going to. So the early intervention initiative at SCARF started with actually connecting with the community, educating general practitioners, lay public. What has been really impressive is how much public support SCARF has received, partly because maybe they are removed from the government, they are an NGO, and they do a superb job. They have, I know Tara told me that in the newspaper Hindu, which is a major newspaper in India, and in my opinion, probably one of the best newspapers in the world if you want to read good editorials, they give her free space to talk about schizophrenia, to talk about psychosis. I haven't tried it here, but I tried in London, Ontario, for the little London Free Press to give us even a column, and they were going to charge us thousands of dollars. So I think sometimes, and a lot of it has to do with leadership. Tara, I joke that I could have worn a sari, but I still would not have acquired her persona. Tara had a mentor, Dr. Sarda Menon, who is now about 89, and if you meet her, she's still active. And Dr. Menon was the department chair. I'll tell you a little story about this. Dr. Menon was the department chair at the University of Madras. When she retired at the age of 58 or 59, that's when people used to retire back then, she thought she should finally do something useful. And instead of running a department, and so she decided to start SCARF, which was, she got together a few people with very little resources, but the idea was to rethink the entire way that mentally ill are treated, to go and connect with people in the villages and so on. And then when she retired, Tara took over, and it's almost like not only a duplication, but her leadership is amazing. On one hand, she is very flexible, but at the same time, she's very tenacious. She wants to do something, she'll make the connections. She has received amazing amount of support from the Japanese consulate, from Deutsche Bank, from all kinds of sources to keep this program going. And as you will see glimpses of it, an early intervention, they actually thought about it quite a while ago, even while they were doing late intervention, because they had so many untreated patients, people who had been ill for 20 years, 25 years. They did initially some course and outcome studies in first episode psychosis, and as I indicated earlier, they're now involved in this cross-cultural study with us. One of the things that we did together was that we wanted as much as possible to have similar models of care. So their model of care is also based around case management. They do not have a separate early intervention. They can't afford to have that. They have a program for all phases of psychotic disorders. But within that, they started doing the triaging of people who had their first episode. They introduced cognitive assessments and using the same protocol that we do here. And the approach, again, is very similar to PEP in the sense that there's a huge emphasis. And on their side, unlike ours, almost 100% take by the families. The families get involved, and as Vidya will show you probably later on, some more facts about that. Pharmacological interventions, they are essential, and one of the things that SCARF does is for most people who cannot afford medication, so they provide free medication, but those who can, they pay for their medication. Not only that, SCARF is essentially an outpatient facility, and they have some day facilities, but they're connected to an inpatient facility which is not in a hospital. It's slightly on the outskirts of Chennai in a semi-rural place, and it's a number of small 2-story, 4, 6 apartment buildings. And the way they fund that, I found it really, really amazing. They will take patients from anywhere in the country. And some rich families sometimes hear about SCARF. They have a really ill person. They'll take them, but on the condition that they have to buy one of these apartments. So they buy the apartment, and when the person gets better, the apartment gets turned over to SCARF. And that's how they have built their inpatient facilities. The other thing I found, again, it's only culturally relevant. I don't think we can do that here. Male patients with first episode psychosis under the age of 18 are admitted to the female unit, where you have mostly middle-aged women with bipolar disorders, and they are so nurturing towards them. It was also to avoid the fear of the younger male patients being traumatized by older patients, either through aggression or sexual aggression, because they don't have the kind of staff that they can watch all the time. So actually, female patients look after younger male patients. They cook together. It's quite impressive how with little resources they have been able to do that. And the medication is an interesting. Rahul, are you here somewhere? Oh, okay. Rahul Manchanda, who, unlike me, did some psychiatry in India. He did his postgraduate training first in India. And I remember him telling me the story that when he came to England, he saw, this is late 70s, he saw patients being treated with 10, 15, 20 milligrams of Haldol. And if I remembered the story right, he said to his professor, what is different about these patients? Because In India, patients couldn't afford much medication, so we only gave them 1 milligram or 2 milligrams of Haldol, and they got better anyway. So why do patients need here 20 milligrams? And now, after so many years, we have learned that how wrong we were about that. Because there used to be this concept of rapid neuroleptization. Give them as much as you can. And at SCARF, you'll see patients really receive what I would call rational pharmacotherapy. Low doses, and patients tolerate it better. They also use all of the medications that we use, much to the annoyance of pharmaceutical companies. India has always produced cheap medications because they have generally, the patency law is a little bit interpreted a bit differently. There are probably millions of brilliant chemists in India. As long as they know the final product, they know how to make it. So as soon as a product becomes available, they make it. Risperidone, when it first came to the market, we used to pay $1 a pill here, $1 per milligram. In India, you got it for 5 cents. And I even heard rumors that people were actually importing it from there. But that is how they have been able to keep up. And SCARF has a budget that buys these medications. Some of them are given through donations and make them available to patients who cannot afford it. Looking at the other early intervention systems in Asia, and one of the things you'll notice is that the early intervention services in Asia, where they have been developed, are in relatively higher income Asian countries, like Korea, and I'll show you in a minute, in Hong Kong as well. The improvement rates, and this is sort of symptomatic improvement rates, are really similar. Like at 1 year, 80% of their patients are relatively free of psychotic symptoms. And as has been demonstrated elsewhere, people who have shorter delays, who got into treatment earlier, managed to get better quicker than patients who had very long delays. What the difference is that their patients stay well longer. And we can talk about that later, why. Hong Kong has Eric Chen, who I know very well, has set up an early intervention service. Now, again, Hong Kong is not your typical South Asian country. It's a relatively high income, but even there, we have a ratio here of 20 patients to 1 case manager. They have a ratio of 150 patients to 1 case manager. And I asked Eric, how do you manage to do this? And again, it's the same sort of answer as happens in Chennai, that families take over a lot of the functions that case managers would otherwise do. And they don't actually need very intensive case management. They need clinical care. They need somebody to follow them. And Eric has published a lot on early intervention. Their results are very, very good. They're really no different from ours. Singapore has actually set up EI programs throughout their little country, but there's about 6-7 million people. I'm looking at Tom because he knows this information. Is it about 6 million? Okay. But they have incorporated that into their national mental health program. In Mexico, there is a movement. I met some of these people, and they seem to be, at least in the pockets that they have established, again, getting very good results. Symptomatic remission in 95% of people, and functional remission is very impressive, and more than 50% compared to 4% in regular care. In Latin America, I think there are a few other programs. Most of them are in urban areas in Brazil, but it's beginning to grow. As Tara's program, SCARF, deals as I said, with all phases. But there's a particular issue about people who are chronically ill and never treated. And in fact, the study that Tara did a few years ago, it is a remarkable study where they showed outcome in patients who had not been treated for a mean of 15 years, never been treated, had been ill for 15 years. As you can see here, that in most developed economies, most patients at some point will get treatment for their psychotic disorder, for schizophrenia. And even if you don't have early intervention services, they will, in fact, more likely, they will actually end up in hospital and get some kind of treatment. However, that's not the case in developing or underdeveloped countries. There have been a number of studies arising mostly from SCARF, but not exclusively, also from the National Institute of Mental Health in Bangalore, that have actually studied this patient population. And it's a very rich source of data, especially for things like abnormal movements prior to exposure to neuroleptics, that 15 to 20% of patients with schizophrenia have abnormal neurological signs even before they're ever exposed to medication. Why are people untreated? You can see, obviously, the lack of availability of not only psychiatrists. Yes, in SCARF, yes, people have access to medication, but in most places, most people cannot afford it. Acceptability, contrary to what sometimes people very romantically think, that outside the Western Hemisphere there is no stigma about mental illness. In fact, it's quite the reverse. There is too much stigma. Somebody asked a question yesterday, I think it was Emmanuel Stipp, is there a positive side to stigma? There is no positive side to stigma. What I think there is, that when there is too much of something that is bad, some protective things come into place. And what happens in India is that there is really, really terrible stigma about mental illness. And then the families, in a sense, when they have a member that is ill, they almost put like a blanket around them and protect them from the outside world until they are better. And the two outcome measures for families there, and we've seen the same thing in our study, is one, being able to go to work and being able to get married. And the stigma is nowhere worse when it comes to, except when it comes to marriageability, because if somebody finds out that someone had a mental illness, they may not be able to get married. So for this reason, yes, the stigma exists, but because it's so bad that if there is availability of family, and most people do have families, they tend to protect them, and they will somehow, if they get access to treatment. There are also issues about, explanatory models, which we deal with here as well. Part of the problem has been that traditional psychiatry in India has been like taking a photocopy of the Western psychiatry, using DSM, using the same kind of models. And these are generally going to be rejected by people. They are also rejected here by many people. So I think there is some movement now to start incorporating varying models of explanatory models of mental illness. And as I said, there is a great stigma in seeking help. There's even a stigma of being a psychiatrist. My mother, who was probably the greatest person I've ever met in my life, when I told her after I came to England that I'm going to do psychiatry, she didn't say anything. But many years later, someone asked me a question about hypertension or something, and she said, he wouldn't know anything. He's not a doctor anymore. So this is the kind of, I think there is a real stigma about even, like you're not doing medicine anymore. And for that reason, the programs like SCARF have done an immense service, both publicly and also in training young psychiatrists. The access is very poor, and of course, there is no medical insurance for majority of the people. I mean, if you work in a software company and you work for Ford or you work for some big company, you'll have health insurance. But contrary to the image that people have or given of incredible India, 70% of the people still have very little. This particular study, when I saw this about 12 years ago, that we had Tara in London to come and present some of this work, it is amazing what they were able to do. They did a door-to-door survey of 100,000 population. 66,000 of these people were over 15 years old. And they found 260 cases of schizophrenia. The mean duration of illness was 12 years, and 30% of these patients had never been treated. And that is a challenge in itself. The untreated patients, as one would expect, they were older, they had longer duration of illness, they were more symptomatic, they were severely disabled, they were often uneducated and divorced, but still lived in extended and joint families. So somehow they were still remained, majority of them remained integrated, although I have seen some pictures from Tara of a couple of people, especially in rural areas, for years their legs were chained, and that's the only way they could contain them. But what was remarkable is that the majority of these people actually got better when they got treatment. Getting the untreated to treatment. I think the challenge, obviously, for their program was how to plan services that would reach out to those who do not have access, which is a large proportion of especially rural population. So they created this, and they've been doing this study for several years. Vidya, do you remember the acronym, what it stands? It's what? Community Psychiatric Services of India. Yeah, Community Psychopsy Study, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. But it's a really wonderful combination of traditional approach and high tech. For years, SCARF has been going into villages, training lay people who have at least a high school education, training them with basic mental health skills of how to monitor patients who obviously get started on treatment by psychiatrists or physicians, and how to remind them about medication, how to talk to their families. And I'll digress just for a minute to tell you a story that Tara told me many years ago, that they were doing one of these projects in a few villages, and those days, we used a lot more long-acting medications. And so they were going in these villages, and nobody would turn up for taking these injections. So eventually they thought that maybe they should talk to people who are not patients or those families. So they talked to Panchayat. Panchayat is basically a village-level government where you have 5 elders who are elected. So they talked to them. They said, "Why is nobody coming?" And they said, "Well, we were wondering when you were going to come and talk to us. What is it you want to do?" And so they explained. They said, "No problem, but you people come from Madras. You're coming from a big city. They're suspicious. They're not going to talk to you. Why don't you, when you send the nurse, ask them to come and talk to us. We'll go with you, and we'll bring the..." So they would sit under a tree, set a table, and everybody came for their injections. So it's a kind of a combination of, using local tradition, local culture with, here are some sort of pictures of, these are trained community, these are relatively cheap ways of delivering care, and these are the functions that they provide. And each of these workers, because they cost relatively less, relatively low cost, they have only about 15 people to take care of, so they have the time to spend with them, which is a bit like case managers, except that they don't have any professional qualifications. I'll skip that. These are just some images. Well, here's an image of what I was talking about earlier. This is how they found them in this study. This is now many years ago. And some of them hadn't washed their hair for years. Just a few words about the telepsychiatry program. This is how it was funded, and it actually started after the tsunami in 2004, because the impact of the tsunami, apart from the physical impact, the mortality and so on, what was left after that was a huge amount of psychological trauma and the increase in mental health problems. And this telepsychiatry program has now become what's called mobile telepsychiatry program. So what it is, basically, they bought a bus with this fund they got from the Deutsche Bank, and they retrofitted the bus. The bus basically inside has been hollowed out, and you have a TV screen, a little desk, 2 chairs, and the other part of the bus is a pharmacy where you have a window on the side. So basically, the bus goes from village to village, connects with the psychiatrist in the city, and the local worker sees the patient, interviews the patient, and then the psychiatrist interviews the patient through the interactive TV, prescribes, because most of these patients are very ill, gives a prescription through the TV, and right in the bus is the pharmacy, so the medication gets delivered, and then the community worker, these low-cost trained community workers will then follow. Then they are assigned that case, and then a few weeks later they will, they will have another consultation with the psychiatrist. We have shamelessly borrowed this model. We just heard last Friday we were successful in getting a grant of setting up a low-cost service in my native Kashmir, because there has been a lot of conflict there for many years, and there's an 80 times increase in mental health problems. And we're going to be doing something very similar there, because there is no other way. Kashmir is very mountainous. There are some villages are very remote. But this is, to me, this is a revolution. This is truly, and the other thing, there's a picture of how they do this, and that's the pharmacy. So the side of the bus opens and it becomes a pharmacy. And this is their public health campaign. So they'll set up these in the open air, these TVs, and have films, and they also actually run every year. They run a film festival for films that have to do with mental health in Chennai. And they are using, and this is the funny thing about India, people, there are 550 million cell phones in India. You cannot get a landline, but it's very cheap to get a cell phone. And again, programs like TARA have really honed in on this, and they're using this SMS messaging system to remind patients. And we're now thinking about maybe we should do this. We should use electronic media to access our patient to deliver care. So this is groundbreaking as far as I'm concerned. I will skip this because Pat actually covered this in terms of the economic evaluation of, and okay. This is Tara's estimation. I don't know exactly, I think it refers to overall that the 20% of the money is spent in early psychosis and 80% on chronic mental illness. Do you know the SOF study? Oh, this is the long untreated psychosis. Okay, yeah, that I already kind of alluded to that. But I think what Tara wanted to convey is that how in the last 20 to 25 years, it may not seem a huge improvement, but it is still an improvement from a mean of 10 years of untreated illness to 3 years. And there are now actually many more NGOs. There's another wonderful NGO in Chennai called the Banyan, and it's a community organization that provides mental health care to only women and women who have no home. Basically, these are women who just drift from state to state, and they have generally been abandoned by their families after they became mentally ill, thrown out of their homes, and then they drift. And it is amazing. This is run by two women, two social workers, who again have just basically survived on grants from different consulates, different organizations. And philanthropy, unfortunately, is not yet very much, hasn't really taken roots in India, even though you have at least, I don't know, 10 or 15 billionaires there. So in terms of going forward, I think it's kind of obvious when we have limited resources, you need to find targets. You cannot spread your care to everybody, and that is a challenge for India. Okay. I think this is probably the last slide that Tara wanted to kind of get across, that even though the resources are maybe, because the resources are so limited, we really need to take the public health approach to mental illness. And I would suggest that's not true only about lower economic income, low income and middle income countries. It's also true about us. I think we have to treat this as a public health problem. And by the way, there's Dr. Tara. So if you had any illusion until now you know it. We work with the entire team. They actually have a much bigger team, but so I'm going to stop there, and I don't know if I can answer any question, but I'll try my best. Thank you very much.